So I want to read to you this first part in Revelation. It says, "When he opened the sixth seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth, the full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale." Now, I've talked a little bit about apocalyptic language. This is the language of the Old Testament. It's the language that John was using here. And it's interesting when you think about the birth of Jesus, and there's these observers of the sky recognize irregularities, right? There's the northern stars, there's a cosmological irregularity. And this is associated with end times, okay? That there'd be these irregularities. And for those of us that hold that the end times begins in the church age, this is kind of an interesting series of things to discuss, because it's looking like Jesus comes to earth and now the end times begins, in a sense. Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is at hand. What do you mean by that? Well, he meant that the kingdom of heaven is right here, right now, not somewhere in the future, not some vast distance far away, but right here, right now. And it was embodied in himself. So this language that's used to describe the end of the world could be a future events, quite possibly. But it could also be describing today. Now, if you go a little further down, it gets a little more dreaded here. In 14, it says, "The sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place." Now, this is impossible for him to mean this literally, because he didn't forget what he had just written when you get to the next part, okay? Then the kings of the earth and the great ones, and the generals and the rich and the powerful, and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and rocks, "Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand?" So this leads to another really important point, okay? The standard that God will use to judge the world is actually going to be the gospel. The gospel itself is going to be the actual standard that God will use. It's not that the Ten Commandments aren't important. It's not that the Ten Commandments don't reveal the wrath of God. They do. But in the end game, when it's all said and done, that's the standard. Now, yet again, a potential argument for seeing the end times as being right now, as opposed to some future events. I want to be very careful. I used to be really dogmatic about this. I'm pretty convicted of my position on my eschatology, my views of end times. But I'm trying to be a little bit more open to the possibility of other views being correct. I think it's wise to do that. I think one of the end times views that I have issues with is it puts the land of Israel as being very important. And when Jesus was talking to the woman at the well, he says, there comes a time, the time is coming that God will not ask his worshipers to worship on this mountain or that mountain. Additionally, when you look at these passages in Revelation, it appears that the signs we're looking for are not necessarily signs of political strife. Not those things don't matter. They do. But there are other signs to take into account. Now, what type of cosmological irregularities would we account for? Well, one we would account for is the birth of Jesus. And that would seem to make sense. Now, it's not as drastic as John is describing, right? But the standard that when he says that the wrath of the Lamb, the standard is the gospel, that means that standard is now. And we call this the already and not yet, which I've described before. There's a sense in which if you're a believer, you're already saved. If you're a believer, you're already resurrected. And there's another sense that you stand in condemnation. So part of the gospel message is someone stands in condemnation, and God's standard is that. That is the standard by which he judges. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that so I don't repeat myself again, but I hope the message got through.